Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and welcome to Omni at the Movies, where today I'll be talking about one of my most anticipated movies of 2025, The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie. Yeah, I have been greatly anticipating this because I am a Looney Tunes fan, although I have also been a bit unsure about it because as the trailers have been released, they emphasized things that didn't necessarily make it look like the best movie. Yet at the same time, all the word coming in from people who had seen it said that it was brilliant. So I wasn't sure what to think. I went in hopeful but bracing myself. And having gotten back from it, I'm going to tell you right now, it was worth it. It's definitely a good movie. Now, the thing you gotta know about it is that as Looney Tunes movies go, it's actually a little more heartfelt than you might expect. Like, the Looney Tunes, they're known for being crazy, right? They don't go for sentimentality. Well, rarely do they ever. Like, the Mark Anthony and Pussyfoot ones, those clearly have some heart to them. And there are others where you can look at them and go, yeah, they're clearly putting forward a particular idea that's a bit more sentimental than other cartoons would be. Generally speaking, though, when we think of Looney Tunes, we think of craziness, we think of chaos, we think of at least two characters trying to beat the ever-loving tar out of each other until one of them has finally had enough. This is a little bit different because it's kind of exploring the dynamic of Porky and Daffy, but it's doing so in a way that feels natural to the characters. Like I said, it's sentimental, but that sentimentality feels like it comes from a place of understanding who they are. It's asking the question, why do Porky and Daffy hang out together? When they're such polar opposites. Porky has always been the straight man. He just wants some normalcy. He's not the wackiest of characters. Whereas Daffy is chaos incarnate. His very existence upsets the nature of things. At least in this incarnation, So having these two together, of course, works for comedy. But if they were real people, why would they stick together? And the movie manages to explore that question and see how their relationship can be mutually beneficial, how they can butt heads with each other, and why they will ultimately stick together at the end without losing sight of the fact that it's still a zany cartoon, and that the point is for them to be delivering some laughs as well. Now, the thing you got to keep in mind there is that because it's a little more sentimental, that does mean that the movie is not quite as madcap as it could have been. That's not to say it isn't madcap, mind you. It is fully embracing the idea that it is a cartoon, and a wild one at that. So crazy gags, weird one-liners, all the things you would expect are there. They're just dialed back a little bit from what you might expect from some of the classic shorts or even some of the newer stuff, so that it can balance out with that sentimentality. But like I said, the sentimentality feels 100% on point. This was made by people who really do understand these characters, and they wanted to do right by them while simultaneously exploring what they could. The last time I saw the Looney Tunes get this close to actually being sentimental in a way that felt sincere was actually in Looney Tunes Back in Action. I did a whole video on that where Bugs and Daffy have that little heart-to-heart by the campfire, and for the first time ever, Daffy just kind of opens up to Bugs in a way that he wasn't expecting. It didn't go too far, obviously, but it did go just far enough that it actually mattered. And The Day the Earth Blew Up feels like a natural extension of that for these characters. Specifically Porky and Daffy. Bugs isn't in it, obviously. Though Petunia is in it. And Petunia is a character that they've always kind of struggled with, right? You know, in the classic cartoons, her personality didn't extend very far beyond Porky's girlfriend. And whether or not he even wanted her as a girlfriend could sometimes vary. But she was only ever in the oldest of the old shorts. She disappeared after a while. They kept her around in the comics, of course, but even the comics didn't necessarily do that much with her. Until, of course, we got to the point of Wabbit / New Looney Tunes, where after the first season tried to throw in more original characters than bring back classic ones, they finally brought in the rest of the classic characters as well, or at least as many as they could, even bringing back some characters that were completely forgotten. Petunia was one of them. She got reinterpreted there as kind of a scatterbrained, high-energy nutcase that, again, contrasts with Porky. And that was a pretty good incarnation, but she only stuck around for a couple of episodes before the whole series, in fact, got canceled. Then they brought her in for Looney Tunes cartoons, which The Day the Earth Blew Up is directly spun off from, even though it's not in continuity, because what is continuity to the Looney Tunes, right? But they finally decided to give her some solo episodes there, where she was like the eternal optimist. No matter what happens around her or to her or what situation she finds herself in, she never loses that glass half full mentality, which turns out was pretty hilarious. I thought they might stick with that for the movie, but the movie's supposed to be its own thing. So here she's reinterpreted as something of a nerd. A scientist with a lot of ambitions, but isn't really taken all that seriously. And surprisingly, they managed to do it without playing into modern agendas. That's all I'm going to say on that regard. Petunia does feel like a genuine underdog. She's not egotistical. She is endearing. And she also, again, makes a good counterpart to Porky. And their romance in this movie actually does feel, again, like a very sincere and authentic romance. The kind of thing where you do want to see them together at the end. And she also matches their insanity. Like, it's not like the way things used to be where if you introduced a female cartoon character, she was kept set aside so that the cartoon antics didn't affect her. I still recall that weird moment in the first Space Jam movie where Bugs had to shove Lola out of the way from being crushed by one of the Monstars, the implication being that if he didn't, she might actually get hurt, even though she's a cartoon character. So nothing like that happens in this movie. Petunia is 100% as crazy and out of control as the other characters. Maybe not much as Daffy, because Daffy is the ultimate screwball in this thing. But overall, she does get a good portrayal here. Is this the portrayal that they'll stick with going forward in any new projects? If there are new projects, I don't know, but at least they're doing something good with her. On a technical side, the movie looks great. The animation is some of the best animation you're going to find in Warner Brothers. I have seen in comments on my previous videos about the trailers that some people have said the animation looked a little too smooth, like it was trying to be more Disney than it was Warner Brothers. It didn't have the certain snappiness. Well, I think if you compare it to the older Looney Tunes, like I'm talking 1930s into the very, very early 40s, it actually does match that. And in a weird way, it also kind of matches the animation of Tiny Toon Adventures. You may recall that Tiny Toon Adventures wanted very much to look different from the cartoons of, say, the 80s, where a lot of animation was recycled and it was very stiff, and sure, it was cost effective, but it looked as cheap as it was. So they went to the point of being so animated in that show that it was almost too animated at times. I don't want to say that The Day the Earth Blew Up gets to the point where it's too animated, but it's definitely skewing more in that direction, and I do think it's on point. It's definitely not the same as the stuff that was made by Chuck Jones or Friz Freeling. It's more in line with the Bob Clampett stuff, which is intentional. They were directly drawing from Bob Clampett. There are interviews about that where the filmmakers say that was their primary inspiration for how this movie was going to play out. So I think it works. It's good animation, and they do some interesting stuff with it. Like, well, I don't want to give too much away, but, 2D and 3D elements blend pretty well together. There's also something interesting they did where, you know how in the classic cartoons the backgrounds were these paintings that had a different look and color and texture than the cel animated characters that were placed over it? Well, this movie recreates that style, and there's also one character who most of the time he's on screen is animated like he's the part of the background. And it works. It's a part of the joke. I actually think it's a very layered part of the joke, although to explain fully why would require me to go into spoilers to a certain degree. But the movie does look really, really good. And I also would recommend sticking around through the credits, not just because there's stuff during and after the credits. Yeah, there is. But in addition to that, the credits play over production sketches and concept art for the movie. So you get a little look behind the scenes of the work that went into the visuals. So laying out how the characters move, certain alternate designs that were considered but didn't ultimately make it into the final version. It's a pretty interesting behind-the-scenes look that's part of the movie. Can't complain about that. I like my behind-the-scenes. Now, I won't say the movie is perfect, mind you. Like I said, in order to have that sincere sentimentality fit in, they did have to dial back the zaniness a little bit. So it's not going to be as crazy as the classic cartoons, although it's still skewing in that direction. Just, dial back your expectations a little bit, or else you might just be very disappointed. And as for those moments in the trailer that tended to make us wonder about, what direction the movie was going to go in, was it going to pander or anything? Actually, when it comes to those kind of jokes, like the butt jokes and whatnot, they sometimes actually do land. If they don't, though, they're over pretty quickly and don't ultimately have that big of an impact. So that's a relief. Although, again, they're still there. They aren't necessarily in line with what the Looney Tunes are known for. So just keep that in mind as well. And in terms of character writing, there is one twist regarding a particular character that I do feel could have been handled better, but I can't really get into why without spoiling things, and I don't want to spoil this movie for any of you. So let's just say, while they do just sort of run with that twist when it happens, it could have been handled maybe a little bit better, even if that handling was to be sort of self-aware about it. But what ultimately makes this movie work is the fact that it is sincere. it comes from a place of love. And it doesn't feel like it was the sort of thing that there was too much studio interference with. Because, again, you had those moments from the trailer that the marketing team certainly emphasized to try appealing to what they think children would like. But for the most part, this movie feels like it was made by people who didn't want to make that sort of movie. They wanted to make something that felt like a classic Looney Tunes cartoon, and also a classic sci-fi movie. If you like classic sci-fi, particularly from the 50s era, you're going to get way more out of this movie than you would if you don't. Because, obviously there's the homage in the title. The day the Earth stood still, the day the Earth blew up, that's pretty clear. But there's also homages to stuff like Earth versus the Flying Saucers, The Blob, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Night of the Living Dead, even a little bit of Metropolis, and towards the end a little bit of Armageddon, which I know isn't a 50s one, but it's still there. So as a piece of sci-fi with a nice retro aesthetic and everything, it also works well on that regard. I guess the way you could describe it is a 50s sci-fi movie where the Looney Tunes are thrown into the spotlight as the heroes. Now, if that doesn't intrigue you, I don't know what will. Now, it is worth noting that even though the movie was started by Warner Brothers, it's not distributed by Warner Brothers. It was sold off to Ketchup Entertainment, which nobody had heard of before, and that's pretty much the only reason it survived the Warner Animation purge. And I think maybe that was done kind of on purpose. There has been some talk leading up to this movie's release that if the movie does well, there's a better chance that Coyote vs. Acme might be saved and finally get released somehow. Now, I kind of wonder if maybe Warner Brothers allowed this one to be sold off kind of as a way to test the waters without necessarily taking any financial hits. They let another studio have it. It's a fairly low-budget movie. I think the budget's roughly the same as Godzilla Minus One, actually. And if it failed, then they didn't lose any money on it. In fact, they sold it, so they got to pocket some change for it. But if it does well, then they can step back in and go, hey, how about making a deal on some distribution rights for home media and streaming? And then they can also move forward with their own projects if they so choose. Because then they would think, there is an audience for Looney Tunes. Space Jam: A New Legacy flopped for other reasons. So I think that this movie does deserve to succeed. Again, the budget is like the same size as Godzilla Minus One, more or less. Godzilla Minus One did gangbusters. This movie can do gangbusters as well. And if it does well, then we might finally see Coyote vs. Acme and some other Looney Tunes stuff. But even if we set that aside, I still would like this movie to do well because it deserves it. Like I said, it's coming from a place of understanding. It's a love letter to the Looney Tunes. It's a love letter to classic science fiction. It's not a movie that panders. It's a movie that genuinely wants you to enjoy your time watching it. It may not be the craziest Looney Tunes thing ever, but it's definitely one that I think people will like all the same. I certainly liked it. So if you've been on the fence about it, I say give it a shot. You might actually be surprised at how good it turns out. In fact, some of the writing in here is so good and so layered that I would love to talk to the people who actually wrote it, because I need to know how their thought process went. Like, some of the things, again, I don't want to get into any spoilers, but there are certain elements throughout the movie that seem like they're jokes at first, but when you put them all together, it paints a picture that makes you wonder, are they going a little bit deeper than just the weirdness of the gag? I don't know, but it sure did work for me. So, again, if you're on the fence about it, I don't think you need to be. I think this movie worked out. I'm glad it was saved. I'm glad we got to see it. And hopefully, if it does well, it'll mean the Looney Tunes are back. But that's just what I have to say about it. And, well, You guys can say whatever you want, of course. I just know that I enjoyed this movie. So that's all for now. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer saying that's all, folks.